Yeah, that's a segue into the final question. Again, each one of you needs to give your perspective, right? Which is, what sorts of changes does a CISO have to put in her own mind right now going forward? I know you gave some examples, Venky, about the product CISO and the corporate CISO. And then both Deb and Dana, you talked about the fact that they're already in. You may not know that they're in. You don't know when they're going to erupt. So in this mindset, how does a CISO kind of plan for the future? Again, anybody can start.
Go back to developing their own code, building proprietary systems, going back to mainframes and unplugging from the internet.
Okay, so let's do a redo. You can't unplug from the internet. You can't go back to mainframes.
I'm sorry, that just came to mind, but really, sometimes I just want to unplug when we know too much, and it's so scary. I am not a CISO, so that's all I'm going to contribute to this question.
Okay, next.
So I would say after the inventory and get a handle on what you have. I mean, it sounds so basic, but the more that we're acquiring, the more options that we have for use. Now we've got to support this very remote workforce on top of it. So get a handle on what you're supposed to be doing, what your inventory is, where your data is going. This is really important. It can be hard to keep up, but do that. And then look at things like zero trust architectures to give yourself segmentation and separation within all of these different environments that you're working at home, remote, hybrid, cloud. And then beyond that, I would say really important to have some kind of continuous monitoring, because all of what we've been talking about, unfortunately, there's no perfect. And as we've all acknowledged, that means that the criminals and the bad guys are going to get in, unfortunately. So the best that you can do, you build those strong defenses. Absolutely. I'm not saying give up, but understand that you need to assume compromise. And that's where continuous monitoring and, constant threat hunting, chasing down the alerts. You got to have something to be able to see what's going on within your corporate environment. And today that means having some visibility into endpoints on the, for all your remote workers, having visibility into the clouds that you're using at all levels, IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS, and the hybrid cloud. So understanding your private cloud too. Getting that visibility, we've gone well past where you can have continuous monitoring of what comes into your physical wires and is just in your data center. This monitoring needs to be very comprehensive. And if organizations could do that, get a really good sense of inventory and understanding what they're buying and using, what their users are buying and using, and then continuous monitoring that's comprehensive, we're going to get a lot closer to being in a strong security posture.
And just to kind of piggyback to what Diana said, I mean, I think 2021 in general seems to be a proactive versus a reactive sort of approach for CISOs. And maybe it's the pandemic, SolarWinds, hack, maybe combine both, but kind of looking at as you mentioned, continuous monitoring approach, look from the outside in, where you definitely want to have your defense set up for, within your infrastructure, but looking on the outside. What's going on when they're still cooking up, look at what's happening on the outside in the wild and utilize that to whether it's patching or, deciding whether you want to work with a third party or not. And I think one of the key things is continue to push, educate your C-level. I know this sounds going back to the basics, but third party risk management, maybe I'm biased, but hey, SolarWinds tells us it needs to continue to be a board directive. It needs to be something you educate your board, your C-level on, you're constantly talking. In fact, it should be it should be a section of your presentation each and every time you're presenting to the board.
Venky.
Yeah, I put these things in 3 categories, right? One is the area of known knowns, right? Yeah. The known knowns, you should fix, right? As a CISO, right? I mean, those are things that that you can get a handle on, and you should fix those, right? Second category is known unknowns, right? Those are areas where you want to ensure that you have enough coverage, ensure that you have enough monitoring, ensure that you have a mitigation plan in place, and you identify those upfront and have a roadmap and plan. Third category is unknown unknowns, right? And this is where, deploying extensive monitoring, visibility, having that, AI aspect of it, where it's a little bit more futuristic, right? So that you can look at these unknowns, and sort of recategorize maybe some of these patterns into known unknowns and known knowns, right? So over a period of time, you're reducing risk. And when you have these three patterns, and you parallelly need a transformation in the board as well, right? I mean, if we can have a comp committee, why can't we have a cyber committee? We have diversity in the board today. We have comm committees in the board. Instead of explaining cyber unknowns to comm committees, we have qualified people who have a cyber degree or cyber qualification sit on the board and can comprehend that, can help the management team side by side mitigate some of these. So that's a maturity that companies need, to give that focus. If that focus is not there, then you're looking at cyber as a number, right? That's a wrong perspective of looking at cyber, right? And finally, I would sort of say there's also a skills shortage, right? And if as a CISO in your past you've not written a single line of code, how qualified are you to manage the product family, right? And so security is one broad horizontal. You almost expect a CISO to be this jack of all trades that can interact with everybody from lawyers to accountants to management to infrastructure to application people to DevOps, right? And so the fact is that you probably don't have the multifaceted skill sets, right? So that's where you got to focus on what are the critical skills for growth of a CISO, and which are the areas that are getting more and more attacked. We talked about SolarWinds, we talked about supply chain, we talked about DevOps. We don't talk about a telecom router anymore. We don't talk about a firewall anymore. These were 90s, right? We don't talk about mainframes anymore as well, right? And so there are certain areas that you got to evolve your skill set as you sort of go, and security just takes a different shape or form, right? And I think evolution of a CISO and is also a critical part of that. And I think the industry is grappling in getting in dealing with unknowns. I mean, security is an area that you got to be comfortable dealing with unknowns. It's not you don't have your hands around every problem, right? And that's a recognition that not just CISOs, but everybody around needs to have as well.
Great discussion. Again, thank you for your time, Ayesha. Thank you for your time, Deb. Thank you for your time, Diana. And thanks, Venky. Looking forward to future discussions.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.